A dying billionaire with weeks to live shocks the world when he leaves his entire fortune, billions, to a homeless 12-year-old boy no one ever noticed. Overnight, the boy becomes the youngest billionaire in history, but he doesn't buy mansions or disappear into luxury. Instead, he builds a global movement led by kids once abandoned by the system. They laughed at him. They called it madness, until they saw the cities rise, until they saw the world change. And by then, it was too late to stop him. The city of San Francisco awoke beneath a veil of mist that clung to its towers like memories refusing to fade. Outside the glass walls of the Sequoia International headquarters, luxury cars idled, and assistants hustled through revolving doors, their hands balancing coffee trays and tablets like soldiers bearing shields. Inside, in the penthouse corner office, billionaire CEO Vincent Harrow sat alone, staring out at the bay as the fog slowly yielded to the light. The room was silent save for the steady hum of an oxygen tank beside his chair. Vincent was 68 years old, but the mirror across from his desk reflected a man decades older. His once thick hair, now silver, clung stubbornly to a weathered scalp, and his skin had thinned to a delicate parchment stretched across proud bones. The diagnosis had come 6 months earlier, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, unoperable, untreatable, incurable. The doctors had offered him timelines, 6 months if lucky, 4 if not. Vincent had made it to 6, just barely. He no longer attended board meetings. The company, a tech titan built from the garage up, now ran itself. But every morning he came to the office, to sit, to think, to remember. His wealth meant nothing now. The jets, the houses, the legacy brands under Sequoia's wing, all irrelevant in the face of what waited just beyond his failing lungs. Janet, his assistant of 23 years, stood quietly in the doorway. She didn't announce herself anymore. He always knew when she arrived. Her perfume was lilac and memory. "Good morning, Mr. Harrow," she said gently. He nodded but didn't turn around. "How's the world today?" "Still spinning," she replied with a sad smile. "There's another list of organizations requesting donations, memorial hospitals, pediatric cancer centers, scholarships. I've flagged the ones most urgent." He waved a hand. "Leave it. I've made my choices." She hesitated. "Are you sure? These are good causes." "They'll get what they need, but not what matters." His voice was dry as desert wind. "I'm not interested in causes. I want to do something impossible." Janet blinked. She had heard him speak in 100 boardrooms, had watched him dismantle competitors with nothing more than a phrase. But this was different. Vincent finally turned toward her. "Did you find the boy?" Janet stepped further into the room and placed a worn file on his desk. "I did. His name is Elijah Crane, age 12, no known relatives. He's been in and out of the foster system since infancy. His last placement failed 3 months ago. Since then," she glanced down at the notes, "he's been sleeping in shelters, mostly around the Tenderloin district." Vincent opened the file with trembling hands. A grainy photo, paper-clipped to the top, showed a boy with skin the color of caramel and dark, wary eyes. His expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't afraid either. Just waiting. "He reminds me of someone," Vincent murmured. Janet didn't ask who. "You really want to give this boy everything?" she asked carefully. "Your estate plan leaves billions to your private foundation. You said it would be your legacy." "My legacy," he said, lifting the photo, "is a life spent in meetings while people like this boy learn to disappear." Janet stood very still. He looked at her. "Find him. Today." That afternoon, a black town car idled in front of a crumbling brick building with a flickering neon sign that read, "Hope Haven Shelter." It smelled of bleach and desperation. The director, a kind-eyed man named Luis, had been stunned when Janet had called ahead. "Elijah?" he asked, eyes wide. "He's in the back, drawing again, I think. He's always sketching, keeps to himself, doesn't cause trouble." Vincent, bundled in a wool coat and scarf despite the mild weather, waited just inside the shelter's entrance as Luis disappeared down the corridor. Minutes passed, the smells grew stronger. Children's voices echoed faintly from beyond the walls. And then he saw him. Elijah stood at the far end of the hallway, a tattered notebook in his hands, his eyes suspicious. "You're the rich guy," he said flatly. "The one who's dying." Vincent didn't flinch. "And you're the kid who's lived 12 years without anyone showing up for him." Silence stretched between them. "Why me?" Elijah asked at last. "You don't know me." "I didn't know my own son," Vincent replied. That stopped the boy cold. "I had a son once. He was about your age when I last saw him. His mother and I split. I sent checks, birthdays, holidays. But I didn't show up, not really. I was building something." He gestured vaguely. "Now it's built, but he's gone." Vincent paused. "He died 6 years ago. Overdose. I never got the chance to ask who he became." Elijah looked down at his shoes. "That sucks." "It does," Vincent said. Another silence. "You said you wanted to do something impossible," Elijah muttered. "So what? Are you adopting me?" Vincent chuckled, a raspy sound. "Not quite, but I'd like to give you everything I have left." Elijah frowned. "What does that even mean?" Vincent stepped forward and held out a letter. The boy didn't take it. "It means," the old man said softly, "that when I die, the fortune I built will be yours. The shares, the assets, the foundation, everything. With one condition." Elijah stared at him, eyes narrow. "What condition?" "That you don't disappear. That you let the world see what's possible when someone like you gets a real shot." Luis gasped behind them. "Mr. Harrow, this is unprecedented. There's no legal—" "I've already spoken to my lawyers," Vincent interrupted. "He doesn't need to be blood, just willing." "And if I'm not?" Elijah asked, his voice tight. "Then I'll leave it to someone else," Vincent said. "But I think you are." Elijah stared at him for a long time, then slowly he took the envelope. That night the headlines lit up like wildfire. "Billionaire CEO to leave entire fortune to 12-year-old homeless child." "Dying tech mogul chooses street kid over family foundations." "Vince Harrow's final act shocks Silicon Valley." The backlash was instant. Talk shows questioned his mental state. Analysts predicted stock chaos. Former board members accused him of emotional instability. They laughed, until they saw what he did next. The following morning, Elijah Crane stood in a luxury high-rise penthouse with more square footage than the last 5 shelters he'd stayed in combined. A security badge had been clipped to his shirt, though no one had asked him for it. Not the chauffeur, not the doorman, not the private elevator operator. He'd entered Vincent Harrow's world like an uninvited echo, barefoot in a marble foyer that overlooked the entire bay. He didn't know what to do with his hands. Janet emerged from the kitchen carrying a mug of tea and a calm expression that seemed out of place amidst the frantic energy he felt in his chest. "He's resting," she said. "The doctor gave him something to help him sleep." Elijah didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the walls. They weren't walls, really. They were glass, uninterrupted sheets of crystal that shimmered in the morning sun. On one side, the bridge stretched like an arm into the distance. On the other, the skyline bristled with towers he'd only ever seen from the curb. "Do you want to sit?" Janet asked gently. He shrugged. "Not tired?" "That's okay. You can explore if you'd like." Elijah hesitated. Then, with careful steps, he wandered through the penthouse. The furniture was sleek, minimal, the shelves lined with awards and books and framed articles. But there were photos, too. A younger Vincent Harrow with a woman in a red dress. Another of him holding a blonde toddler at the beach. The man looked different in these pictures, less stone. Elijah paused before a photo on the corner table. It was black and white. A boy, maybe 5, wearing a superhero cape and smiling so wide his teeth looked like they might fall out. "That's Leo," Vincent's voice came from behind him. Elijah turned, startled. The old man stood in the hallway in slippers and a robe, oxygen tank rolling behind him. He looked tired, hollowed out, but his eyes were clear. "My son," Vincent said. "That was the year he wanted to be Batman." "Did he get to?" Elijah asked. "Only until Christmas. Then he wanted to be an astronaut." Vincent smiled faintly, then lowered himself into a leather chair near the window. By summer, he wanted to build robots. Elijah sat across from him. "Why'd you pick me?" he asked quietly. Vincent didn't answer right away. He watched the seagulls drift outside the window. "Because you were invisible, and because I know what it means to be ignored by the people who are supposed to see you." Elijah's throat tightened, but he didn't speak. "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" Vincent asked. Elijah shrugged. "Maybe a little." Vincent chuckled. "Good. You're not wrong." They sat in silence for a while. Then Elijah pulled out a crumpled sketch pad from his backpack and flipped to a half-finished drawing. It was a city, not San Francisco, but close. The buildings were strange, angular, impossible, like something out of a dream. Bridges looped in the sky. Parks floated between towers. "You drew this?" Vincent asked. Elijah nodded. "What's it called?" Elijah hesitated, then said, "New Sky." Vincent looked at it for a long time. "You ever think about being an architect?" "I thought about being a lot of things," Elijah said. Didn't seem like it mattered. "Well," Vincent said, "it matters now." The next weeks passed in a strange, floating rhythm. Elijah moved into a guest suite in the penthouse, though he rarely stayed inside. Vincent's legal team began the process of transferring assets, quietly at first, then with mounting noise as the media caught wind. Sequoia's stock price dropped 8% in a single day. Shareholders panicked. The board demanded a meeting. Vincent refused. Instead, he called a press conference. Elijah stood beside him at the podium as cameras flashed like lightning. "This young man," Vincent began, his voice faint but steady, "represents everything this company forgot to care about. He is the future, and I am the past." The statement sent the media into a frenzy. Vincent Harrow names homeless child as sole beneficiary. Wall Street in turmoil. Sequoia founder makes final stand. The public was divided. Some hailed him as a visionary. Others accused him of losing his mind. But behind the headlines, something else was happening. Vincent brought Elijah into every meeting, not just as a guest, but as a participant. Together, they sat through pitch sessions, reviewed charity proposals, met with city officials about public housing initiatives. Elijah asked questions no one expected. Smart ones, honest ones, the kind no adult dared to ask out loud. And slowly, people stopped laughing. At first, Vincent's board resisted. They viewed Elijah as a liability, an embarrassment, a PR stunt with sneakers too dirty for boardrooms. But then they saw what he did next. Vincent named Elijah co-chair of the Sequoia Foundation and gave him control over a new $500 million initiative called the Horizon Fund. Its mission, to find and fund genius in the places society overlooks. Elijah's first move was to contact the principal of his last school, the one where he'd spent 3 weeks before getting pulled for truancy. "I want to go back," he said. The woman was stunned. "To this school?" "I don't want a private tutor," Elijah said. "I want to show up." And he did, every day. With his battered backpack and new glasses, and a quietness that wasn't fear, but observation. He watched, he listened, he learned. And every afternoon, a black car took him back to the penthouse, where he met with architects, designers, engineers, people Vincent brought in not to impress, but to inspire. "I want to build New Sky," Elijah told one of them. "Not just a city, a system." Vincent watched all of this from his chair by the window. Each day he grew weaker, each breath shorter, but his eyes were always on the boy who had once slept on cardboard and now carried blueprints in his hands. He had given Elijah a fortune, but the boy had given him something far greater. Hope. Vincent's decline was no longer something he could hide. Not from his doctors, not from Elijah, and certainly not from himself. The oxygen tank never left his side now, and on most days his body refused to cooperate with the simple act of standing, but his mind remained sharp, even as his limbs betrayed him. He kept a notepad on the table next to his chair and scribbled thoughts as they came, half-formed plans, bits of dialogue, ideas for the future he knew he wouldn't live to see. One evening, Elijah came home from school later than usual. His shirt was stained with paint, and his backpack sagged under the weight of a science project gone sideways. He looked tired, but exhilarated. "I built a model of a building with solar panels and hydro capture for the roof," he said breathlessly, kicking off his sneakers. "The teacher says it's over the limit for the assignment, but she's letting it slide." Vincent smiled, voice hoarse. "Of course she is." Elijah flopped down in the chair opposite him, eyes shining. "I added a mural on one wall, of the shelter." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Hope Haven?" "Yeah." Elijah hesitated. "It's where it started." He didn't need to explain. Vincent understood. That place, for all its worn-out blankets and flickering lights, was the first door that didn't close on him, and it deserved to be remembered, not erased. "Do you want to see it?" Elijah asked. Vincent nodded. The boy pulled out a small tablet and opened the project. Blueprints glowed on the screen, labeled with notes in the meticulous handwriting Elijah had adopted since joining Vincent's world. The building design was simple but elegant, with angular lines and wide windows and a rooftop garden. Vincent studied it carefully, then looked up. "It's beautiful." "You think so?" "I know so." Elijah smiled, but then his expression shifted. "You're not going to be around to see it finished, are you?" The question landed like a bell tolling in a quiet cathedral. Vincent didn't flinch. "No, I'm not." Elijah's shoulders dropped, but he nodded. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Not because I'll be alone again. I know you made everything legal, and Janet's going to help me. I'm scared because I don't want this to end up being just a story people tell once and forget." "It won't be," Vincent said. "You don't know that." "I do," Vincent insisted, leaning forward as far as he could. "Because you're not just smart, Elijah. You're good. You ask questions. You listen. You notice things other people ignore. You carry the weight without even realizing it." "I'm 12, Elijah whispered. "And I was 30 before I learned half of what you already know." The next day, Vincent called Janet into his office. "I need to make one final change," he said. "To the will?" He shook his head. "To the foundation charter." She raised an eyebrow. "What sort of change?" He looked out the window. "I want Elijah to have full executive authority the day he turns 18. Not some board making decisions in his name. He'll have advisors, yes. You, others. But it needs to be his." Janet hesitated. "You trust him that much?" "I've never trusted anyone more." The days that followed felt like the slow unraveling of a great tapestry. The media frenzy died down. The board at Sequoia, realizing Vincent had planned everything with ruthless precision, backed off. Public opinion had turned. Parents wrote in by the thousands thanking Vincent for seeing value in children like theirs. Elijah's face, shy, awkward, determined, appeared on news segments about educational reform, social equity, architecture for the future. But none of that prepared Elijah for the morning Vincent didn't wake up. It was Janet who found him. She didn't scream. She didn't cry, not at first. She simply closed the curtains, turned off the oxygen machine, and called the nurse. Then she went to Elijah's room. He was still asleep, his head buried beneath a blanket, arms wrapped around a sketch pad. "Elijah," she said gently. He opened his eyes. And he knew. The funeral was private, per Vincent's instructions. No press, no spectacle. Just a simple graveside service overlooking the cliffs of Half Moon Bay. Janet stood on one side, Elijah on the other. A string quartet played something soft and distant as the wind tugged at their coats. No one spoke for a long time. Then Elijah stepped forward, holding a small object in his hand. It was the photo of Leo in the Batman cape. He placed it on the headstone and whispered, "He would have been proud of you too." Back in the city, the world kept spinning. But something had shifted. At Hope Haven Shelter, a letter arrived with a check for $5 million and a note, "For every kid you believed in when no one else would. V.H." At Elijah's school, the old computer lab was transformed into a fully funded innovation center, renamed the Harrow Crane Studio for Future Design. And at Sequoia headquarters, a plaque appeared outside the boardroom. Sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one nobody invited, in memory of Vincent Harrow and the boy who reminded him what legacy truly means. 6 weeks after the funeral, Elijah stood at the top floor of Sequoia International, staring out over the city that used to ignore him. The office hadn't changed much. Same view, same silence, but it felt different now. He wasn't just a guest in this world anymore. He belonged to it, or maybe it belonged to him. Janet stepped into the room, carrying a folder and her usual cup of green tea. "You have a visitor in the lobby." Elijah looked up from the blueprint he was sketching on Vincent's old desk. "Who is it?" "He says his name is Malcolm Crane." The pencil dropped from Elijah's fingers. Janet's eyes softened. "Should I send him away?" Elijah shook his head slowly. "No, let him up." 10 minutes later, the elevator opened with a soft chime. A man stepped out, mid-30s, lean but weathered. His clothes were clean but old, his hands rough from labor. His eyes, Elijah's eyes, scanned the space with unease. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," the man said, voice raw. "I don't," Elijah replied. "But I know who you are." Malcolm nodded. "Guess I wasn't much of a father." "You weren't any of one," Elijah said flatly. The man winced. "Fair." Silence. "I saw you on the news," Malcolm continued. "Didn't believe it at first. Kid I left behind now owns more money than I'll ever see in 10 lifetimes. Elijah didn't respond. "I didn't come for money," Malcolm added. "I came because, I don't know, maybe I thought you might want to know I'm alive." Elijah studied him. "I did want to know, years ago." "Yeah," Malcolm said softly. "I was a coward." Another long pause. Then Elijah turned away and walked to the window. "Vincent told me once that pain either becomes a prison or a foundation," he said. "You build something on top of it, or it crushes you. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not offering it." Malcolm stood awkwardly near the elevator, hands in his pockets. "Well, if you ever want to talk—" "I have people to talk to," Elijah said. "But if you ever want to work, we're funding a build in Oakland, transitional housing. They're hiring." The man blinked, unsure how to respond. "You'll be paid like everyone else," Elijah said. "You show up, you build, you disappear again, no second chances." Malcolm nodded. "That's more than I deserve." "It is," Elijah replied. The door closed behind him a moment later. By the end of the year, Elijah had transformed the Horizon Fund into a national program. Dozens of kids just like him, shelter kids, foster kids, couch surfers, were being scouted not for survival skills, but for vision. They weren't being saved, they were being empowered. Elijah made sure of that. He visited each program site personally, took notes, asked questions. In New Orleans, he met a 14-year-old girl who could code better than most Silicon Valley engineers. He offered her a full scholarship, plus a seat on Horizon's Junior Advisory Board. In Detroit, a teen built a solar-powered heater from scrap metal and a broken drone. Elijah sent it to engineers at MIT. In Phoenix, he met a boy who had once lit a dumpster on fire for warmth. Now he was designing urban heat maps with predictive AI to prevent climate-related deaths in low-income areas. Vincent's fortune was changing lives, but more than that, it was changing minds. At a televised education summit, Elijah was invited to speak. He stepped onto the stage in his now signature outfit, sneakers, slacks, and a plain navy hoodie. He adjusted the mic once and looked out over the room full of executives, educators, and political leaders. "I don't have a degree," he began. "I don't have a fancy last name or a legacy to inherit. But I know what it's like to be invisible. And I know what happens when someone finally sees you." He paused. "You keep asking how to fix the system, how to reach kids like me. You don't reach us, you lift us. You move the damn ladder down. You stop calling us at risk and start calling us what we are. Undervalued." He held up a small drawing. A city skyline. New sky. "This is the future I'm building," he said. "Not alone, but with every kid who's ever been told they weren't enough. We're not just your charity case. We're your wake-up call." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. And still, Elijah didn't smile, because he knew the real work was just beginning. By spring, Elijah was known in every major newsroom across the country. They called him the youngest philanthropist in America, Vincent Harrow's miracle heir, the boy who inherited billions. But titles never meant much to Elijah. He still took the train when he wanted to be alone, still carried his sketch pad tucked under his arm like a shield, still kept his bedroom at the penthouse exactly the same, small, neat, and unassuming. He lived like someone who knew how easily comfort could disappear. That made people nervous. At Sequoia's annual shareholders meeting, Elijah was granted a reserved seat in the front row. Beside him, Janet sat poised as always, her eyes calm but alert. She had become more than a guardian. She was a strategist, a steady force, the one person Vincent had trusted to keep the storm from swallowing Elijah whole. When the board called the meeting to order, the room buzzed with anticipation. This was the first time Elijah had attended publicly. His presence shifted the energy like a needle on a compass. The chairman, a cautious man named Blake Rowland, cleared his throat. "Before we begin the fiscal overview, I'd like to acknowledge young Mr. Crane. As you all know, Vincent Harrow left his controlling interest in the foundation to Elijah, and while he is not yet of age to assume full control—" "I'll speak," Elijah interrupted. A few heads turned. Blake hesitated. "Excuse me?" "I said I'll speak," Elijah repeated, rising from his seat. "You've talked about me in rooms like this, around tables like this, but I've never talked to you." Blake gestured uncertainly. "Of course, if you'd like to address the room—" Elijah walked slowly to the podium, his hands in his pockets. He looked at the sea of suits before him, some familiar, some who still saw him as a fluke in sneakers. "My name is Elijah Crane," he began. "I'm 12 years old. I'm the kid you stepped over on the sidewalk, the kid you changed lanes to avoid, the kid who asked for help and was told no 1,000 different ways." He scanned the room. "And I'm also the future majority shareholder of this company." A murmur swept the room like wind through dry leaves. "You think that makes you nervous?" Elijah continued. "Try being me. Try being hungry and scared and alone and still having to show up to school like you slept in a bed. Try watching people walk past you every day with their coffee and their headphones and their phones, and not one of them looks at you like you matter." He paused. "Vincent Harrow saw me, not just with his eyes, with his life. He didn't just write a check, he wrote a new chapter." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "You think I don't know what this company is worth? I know every number, every division, every deal Vincent made, but I also know what it's really worth, what he couldn't buy with billions, his son, his second chance, so he gave it to me." He looked directly at Blake now. "I'm not here to honor Vincent's legacy. I'm here to expand it. You can either help or you can watch from behind." With that, he stepped away from the podium and returned to his seat. The room was silent. Janet smiled behind her hand. Outside, spring rain misted the glass towers of San Francisco. Inside, the tide had turned. That summer, the Horizon Fund launched its most ambitious project yet, New Sky Lab, a 10,000-square-foot design and research campus built not in Silicon Valley, but in East Oakland, where abandoned lots had long outnumbered playgrounds. The idea was Elijah's. A place where overlooked youth could access cutting-edge tools, mentorship, seed funding, and a voice in reshaping the urban future. Within weeks, applications flooded in. One came from a 13-year-old girl named Ava Monroe who lived in a motel with her grandmother and coded games at public libraries to stay warm. Another from Jamal Thomas, who repaired his neighbor's appliances in exchange for school supplies. Elijah read every one. He handpicked the first cohort. Opening day was a media spectacle. Reporters scrambled to capture every moment. But Elijah kept the ceremony simple. No speeches, no ribbon cutting, just a quiet walk through the halls with the new students, his peers, whose minds would shape what came next. "This isn't a gift," he told them. "It's an investment. You've already earned it." From that tour, that day forward, the work never stopped. Designs became prototypes. Prototypes became pilot programs. School attendance in the neighborhood rose 19%. Vandalism dropped by half. Parents who had once stopped dreaming began to believe again. But not everyone celebrated the change. Some saw Elijah's influence as dangerous, uncontrolled, too fast, too public. Anonymous letters were sent to journalists. A whisper campaign suggested Elijah was just a puppet, that Vincent had been manipulated, that the boy was unstable, a liability waiting to implode. Elijah didn't respond. He let the results speak. And still they laughed, until they saw what he did next. The letter came on a Monday. Official stationery, government seal. Elijah had just returned from visiting a Horizon project in Atlanta when Janet handed it to him with a neutral expression. "You've been invited to speak before the Senate Education and Urban Development Committee," she said. Elijah blinked. "The real Senate?" "Yes," she replied, smiling faintly. "The one on television. They want to hear how a 12-year-old ended up directing one of the most disruptive nonprofit foundations in the country." He stared at the envelope. "I'm not ready." Janet raised an eyebrow. "That's exactly why you are." 2 weeks later, Elijah sat in a crisp navy suit at a long table beneath rows of cameras and congressional nameplates. The room felt colder than any boardroom he'd ever been in. More skeptical, more polished, more hungry. Senator Lauren Addington, chair of the committee, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Crane, thank you for being here. We understand you've been instrumental in shaping the Horizon Fund's mission and rollout. But I must ask, who's really running the show?" Elijah leaned into the mic. "I am." A few aides chuckled behind their hands. Addington didn't smile. "You're 12 years old. I was also 12 when I started pitching ideas that made your office call me." That silenced the room. Senator Addington tried again. "Some would argue that your influence, while admirable, lacks structure, oversight. You're reallocating massive financial resources based on intuition and personal judgment." Elijah nodded. "Yes, because I know what it's like to have nothing and to see everything go to people who already have too much. You're right, I use intuition. That's how I knew Ava Monroe was going to design a learning app that's now in beta testing in 4 districts. That's how I knew Jamal Thomas would build an air filtration prototype that Harvard engineers are now reviewing." Another senator, older and clearly impatient, leaned forward. "So your position is that a child with no formal education is more qualified to direct public-facing programs than trained experts?" "My position," Elijah said calmly, "is that your trained experts have had 70 years and still can't fix a broken system. Maybe it's time someone else tried." Janet watched from the gallery, a hand over her mouth. The questions continued. The attacks grew sharper. And through it all, Elijah didn't flinch, because he had something they didn't. He had lived the problem. He was the case study and the solution. And by the end of the hearing, even the most skeptical staffers were taking notes. That night, the footage went viral. Again. He's not a symbol, he's a strategy. Washington Post. The boy who reminded Congress what purpose looks like. NBC. Elijah Crane doesn't want your applause, he wants your seat. Rolling Stone. Autumn came, so did change. Horizon's expansion into New York City included the repurposing of an abandoned high school into a mixed-use learning hub. Elijah gave the inaugural tour himself alongside the mayor. He rarely smiled for the cameras, but that day he did, just once. Because as he passed the mural at the main entrance, he saw it, painted 20 feet high. A boy standing on a pile of books, reaching upward. At the bottom, the inscription read, "He taught us how to build skyward." But with every new success came a new challenge. In late October, Vincent Harrow's estate reached its final disbursement phase. Elijah officially became the majority beneficiary of all his holdings. Trust funds were activated, properties signed over, investment portfolios unlocked. His net worth crossed the $3.2 billion mark. He was, by all legal and financial metrics, the youngest billionaire in American history. And just like that, the scrutiny doubled. Paparazzi followed him. Blogs speculated about his emotional stability. Politicians began whispering about overreach, and still, he showed up to school. Every morning, black car or not, he walked through those public school doors with his backpack slung over one shoulder and homework in his hand, because no amount of money could change the boy who had once counted shelter meal tickets like currency. One morning, as he took his seat in homeroom, a girl slid a folded note onto his desk. It wasn't fan mail, it was a sketch, 2 buildings shaped like hands, lifting people up. He turned to look at her. "Did you draw this?" he whispered. She nodded, shy. "I saw what you did with the New York lab. I want to help." He smiled. And just like that, another fire was lit. The years passed. Horizon grew. New Sky became more than a sketch. It became a prototype, then a city plan, then a construction zone in an abandoned stretch of reclaimed industrial land in Detroit. By the time Elijah turned 16, he had personally mentored over 70 youth designers, coders, and engineers from underserved communities. He had declined Forbes' Billionaire of the Year twice. He had launched a podcast interviewing kids whose lives had changed not because someone rescued them, but because someone resourced them. But he never stopped carrying Vincent's photo. He kept it in his desk, that same black and white shot of Leo in the Cape. The reminder that legacies aren't inherited, they're built. On the eve of his 18th birthday, Elijah stood once again at the glass windows of the Sequoia penthouse, staring out over a city he no longer feared. The skyline hadn't changed much, but he had. So had the world. A press conference was scheduled for the next morning. The board would formally transfer control of Vincent Harrow's remaining shares, completing the transition first initiated by a dying man who had chosen a stranger over comfort, over tradition, over fear. Janet entered the room quietly. She still carried green tea in the evenings, and though her hair had more silver now, her presence remained a kind of compass for Elijah, a North Star tethering him to purpose. "They've confirmed the live stream," she said. 11 million people have pre-signed the viewer feed. You'll be speaking first. Elijah didn't answer right away. "Do you remember when Vincent made me CEO of the Horizon Fund?" "I remember everyone assuming he'd lost his mind." "Maybe he had," Elijah murmured, "or maybe he just saw farther than the rest." Janet crossed the room and placed a small black box on the desk. "He left this for you, said not to open it until your 18th birthday." Elijah's hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper and a flash drive. The paper read, "For the day you stop being my legacy and become your own." He plugged in the drive. It contained a video. Vincent appeared on screen, sick, thinner than Elijah remembered him, but his voice carried the weight of clarity earned through pain. "If you're watching this, you made it, which means I didn't fail. It means that for once a gamble built on heart, not numbers, paid off. He paused, breathing hard. Most people think I gave you my fortune out of guilt or madness, but it was neither. I gave it to you because I saw in you the kind of fire that doesn't get lit by luck. You survived a world that wants kids like you to vanish quietly. But you didn't vanish. You demanded to be seen. Vincent looked away, then back. I spent most of my life building things meant to last, but nothing lasts like impact. You already know that. I just hope this gives you the power to make it even louder. The screen faded to black. Elijah stared at it long after the video ended. That night he didn't sleep. He wrote. He walked the empty halls of the penthouse one final time. He stood on the balcony with the wind in his face, imagining 1,000 kids standing on rooftops like this one, seeing possibility instead of prison. The next morning, the world watched as Elijah stepped to the podium. The room was packed. News outlets, government reps, education leaders, CEOs, students. He stood alone, wearing the same blue hoodie he'd worn on his first day at New Sky Lab. "My name is Elijah Crane," he began. 12 years ago, I was sleeping on a park bench. 6 years ago, I inherited the keys to a kingdom I didn't ask for. Today, I'm not giving a speech. I'm giving it back." A ripple moved through the crowd. "All of it," Elijah said. "Every remaining dollar in the Horizon estate, every share I hold in Sequoia, and every property deed tied to Vincent Harrow's original portfolio. I'm transferring them to a new global trust, governed by a rotating council of youth leaders selected not by pedigree but by purpose." Gasps. Janet smiled behind her hand. "I don't need to be the owner of $1 billion empire to change the world," Elijah continued. "I need to be one of many. I need to build something no one person can ever own again." He held up a thick binder. "This is the blueprint. The next phase of Horizon, not just a fund, but a framework. Schools that design themselves, cities built by those who live in them, governments that listen because they've been rebuilt from the ground up with kids like me in the room from day one." A long silence. Then thunderous applause. That evening, as he walked out of the building, Elijah noticed a boy sitting on the steps. Tattered clothes, holding a notebook. He sat beside him. "You draw?" Elijah asked. The boy nodded, wary. "Let me see." The boy hesitated, then handed over a sketch. It was a bridge, spanning 2 cliffs made of skyscrapers. On the bridge, stick figures walked hand in hand. Elijah studied it. "This is good." "Doesn't matter," the boy said. "Nobody cares." Elijah smiled. "I do." He handed back the drawing and pulled a card from his pocket. On it, a phone number and a name. Bridge Project, Youth Design Fellowship. "Come tomorrow," Elijah said. "Bring your notebook." The boy stared at him like maybe, just maybe, the world had stopped laughing for long enough to finally listen. And in that moment, the story came full circle. Because the most powerful act of legacy is teaching someone else how to build their own. The Bridge Project's first site opened on the south side of Chicago, nestled between an abandoned rail line and a condemned elementary school that had once failed 3 generations of students. Elijah insisted on being there when the doors opened, standing shoulder to shoulder with city officials, civil engineers, and the kids who had helped design it from scratch. It wasn't glamorous. The walls were still half-painted. The digital whiteboards flickered. The plumbing had hiccups. But none of that mattered, because when the kids stepped into the atrium, a vast, sunlit space with murals drawn from their own sketchbooks, they saw something they'd never seen before. They saw a future built in their image. That night, Elijah walked the halls long after the ribbon was cut. He stopped to touch the edge of a steel support beam etched with the names of every contributor. Kids, teachers, volunteers, formerly incarcerated dads, homeless moms. One name caught his eye, Malcolm Crane. He hadn't seen his father since their brief conversation years ago, but There it was, burned into the steel. No fanfare, no credit claimed, just the work. He closed his eyes and breathed. That moment meant more than any award. Months passed. New cities joined the bridge project. Baltimore, Cleveland, Newark. Each center followed the same principle. Let the community design it. Let the kids lead. A girl in Cleveland redesigned a public bus schedule with algorithmic mapping that decreased wait times in underfunded neighborhoods by 40%. A boy in Baltimore led a study on asthma rates and air quality that got the attention of the EPA. But Elijah began to notice a new kind of resistance, not from politicians, from corporations. Donors pulled back. Lobbyists tried to push regulation that would limit youth-led social enterprises. An anonymous op-ed in a major financial journal called the Bridge Project, Idealism Run Amok. That night, Elijah sat with Janet on the penthouse balcony. The city glowed below, a mess of light and shadow. "I think I made them nervous," he said. Janet handed him a mug of tea. "That usually means you're doing something right." "I'm not sure anymore." "Elijah, listen to me," she said, her voice more forceful than usual. "You're 20 years old. You've changed the landscape of how we view youth potential, of how we define leadership. That scares people. But fear isn't a reason to stop." He stared into the tea, steam curling upward like a question, with no easy answer. "Then what is?" "Hope," Janet said. He looked at her. "That's the reason you keep going." He didn't answer, but that night he went back to his sketch pad and began drawing again. Not a building this time, a movement, a network of cities connected not by highways or economies, but by trust, by the belief that if given the chance, a homeless child could one day design the world. The Bridge Network, as Elijah began calling it in his quiet notebooks, wasn't just infrastructure, it was a philosophy. Each city center became a node, and each node connected to the others through shared projects, virtual design labs, and rotating youth fellowships. The world had seen networks of power, of capital, of commerce, but never one made of kids. And it was working. By the time Elijah turned 21, the first cohort of Bridge Fellows had launched 7 startups, 4 of which had already secured national grants. One created a low-cost desalination kit for drought-affected communities. Another designed an AI-powered tutoring system that adapted in real time to non-traditional learners. All of it came from kids once labeled burdens, at risk or lost. They were anything but. On the anniversary of Vincent Harrow's death, Elijah returned to Half Moon Bay alone. He walked to the grave just as the sun was folding into the waves and placed a single compass charm in the grass, the same kind that had been on Caroline Harrow's bracelet. "I kept building," Elijah whispered, "even when it got hard, even when I didn't know if it mattered." The ocean gave no answer, but the wind shifted, and that was enough. The real threat came not with a bang, but with an invitation. A private summit in Geneva, 40 world leaders, 200 corporate executives, a forum meant to chart the next century of innovation. Elijah was the only attendee under 30. He almost didn't go. But Janet insisted. "Your name's on the list now," she said. "If you're not in the room, they'll design a world without you." So he went. And on the second day, during a closed-door session on urban policy, a billionaire developer from Singapore leaned forward and said, "I admire your optimism, Elijah, but cities aren't built on dreams. They're built on deals." Elijah stared at him, and then, in front of all of them, he pulled out a copy of his newest report. It was simple. Metrics, outcomes, lives changed. The Bridge Project had cut juvenile detention rates in pilot zones by 62%. School attendance was up 41%. Local job creation 29% over baseline. "Maybe cities were built on deals," Elijah said, "but the next ones will be built on dignity. Silence. And then, one by one, hands began to raise. Not to object, to ask how they could be part of it. Back home, the response was seismic. New legislation proposed funding bridge-adjacent models across 12 states. 3 Ivy League universities launched youth equity design labs based on Elijah's frameworks. And for the first time in history, a group of teenagers was invited to write recommendations for a UN report on urban poverty. Elijah didn't do interviews that week. He stayed in his room reading letters from kids. One had scrawled in purple marker, "I didn't think I mattered. Then I heard your story." Another, "I showed my mom your video. She said maybe we should start drawing again." Another still, "What do you do when you're still invisible?" He read that last one over and over. Then he picked up his pen and started writing back. By the time Elijah turned 23, the Bridge Network spanned 5 countries. What began as a sketch in a homeless boy's notebook had become a global blueprint. Governments sought his input. Universities offered him honorary degrees. But Elijah remained rooted in the one lesson Vincent Harrow had taught him best. Money builds structures, but trust builds systems. And trust, Elijah knew, could vanish in a moment. The scandal hit in late November. A leaked internal memo, misinterpreted, claimed the Bridge Network was planning to take over public education funding decisions in multiple cities. The wording was vague, technically true, but the interpretation sparked outrage. News anchors called it an unelected billionaire youth cabal. Elijah's name trended on every platform for the wrong reasons. Within hours, headlines shouted, "Too much power, too young." The kid with billions and no accountability. From shelter to kingmaker, who really checks Elijah Crane? Janet moved fast. She arranged a live public address. No script, no PR filter, just Elijah. He stood on stage in the first bridge lab ever built, the one in Oakland, and faced the cameras. "I understand why you're afraid," he said, "because people in power have abused trust for generations. You see a kid with billions, and it feels like another repeat of the same story." He let the silence hang. "But I was never the story," he continued. "You were. The kids who survived, the parents who fought, the teachers who stayed when the buildings collapsed. I don't want to control education. I want to return it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a document. "This is a proposal to decentralize the Bridge Network's influence, to build regional boards made up of local students, families, and teachers, to make sure no one person, not even me, gets to decide alone." A reporter stood. "You're giving away your control?" "Yes," Elijah said. "Why?" "Because I was never supposed to keep it." The room exhaled as one, and the tide turned again. 2 years later, Elijah stepped down as executive director of the Horizon Foundation. He didn't announce it with a press release. He didn't call a press conference. He simply sent a letter to every active bridge site. It read, "You are the foundation now. Build like the world depends on it, because it does." He didn't disappear. He just shifted. He went back to design, to teaching, to walking into new cities where kids waited with notebooks and dreams. He became a mentor, and sometimes a myth, but always a mirror, showing young people who they could be if someone just believed in them before the world told them they weren't enough. At 28, Elijah stood in a quiet ceremony where a new city was being launched. A vertical city, sustainable, self-regenerating, built by a coalition of bridge engineers and architects, all under the age of 25. A little girl walked up to him. She couldn't have been older than 6. She held a drawing in one hand and a flower in the other. "My teacher says you used to be poor," she said. Elijah knelt to her level. "I was." "And now you help build cities?" "Yes." She blinked. "How?" He smiled. "I started by drawing one." Elijah didn't seek out the spotlight anymore, but it found him anyway. On the 15th anniversary of the first Bridge Center, a documentary premiered. It chronicled the journey from that misty San Francisco morning, the boy with nothing but a sketchbook and an old man with days to live, to a global network of cities reshaped by the ones once left behind. The final scene showed Elijah, older now, standing on the rooftop of a school in Lagos, Nigeria. A drone camera pulled back to reveal a vast complex below. Solar roofs, hydro walls, vertical gardens, classrooms without ceilings. Built by local youth, financed by Horizon's Reinvestment Trust, replicated in over 30 countries. He wasn't alone on the rooftop. A group of kids gathered around him chattering in multiple languages. They weren't in awe. They were comfortable, like they belonged with him. Because they did. When asked why he was still traveling, still designing, still sketching in every airport and on the back of every envelope, Elijah answered with a story. There was a man, he said, who had all the money in the world, but no time left. He saw me, not just as a cause, but as a continuation. He gave me everything. But what I didn't realize then was that he wasn't giving me his fortune. He was giving me a vote, a chance, a door. He paused, looking down at his sketchpad. I've spent every day since trying to hold that door open for someone else. In the years that followed, Elijah returned less frequently to the places that bore his name. Not because they needed him less, but because they needed each other more. Horizon ran without him. The Bridge Network had its own generational leadership now, leaders who had once been children sitting cross-legged at Elijah's feet, watching him draw cities out of the air. He never married. He never stopped moving. But in every Bridge Center, there was always a room for him. A chair, a drawer filled with sharpened pencils and clean paper, because he might show up, he might stay the week, or just the night. He was more idea than man now, but if he visited, the staff knew to gather the kids because he always asked the same thing, show me what you're building. On his 40th birthday, Elijah returned to Hope Haven for the first time in 2 decades. It was no longer a shelter. It was a creative academy. The original bricks remained, but the roof had been replaced with green panels, and the beds were now reading nooks. The kitchen was still there, but it served as a culinary studio. The place had become a bridge itself between what was and what could be. He walked the halls slowly, fingertips grazing the chipped paint they hadn't bothered to fix, as a reminder of where it began. In the main common room, above a wall of student art, hung a single photo, Vincent Harrow. Below it, a plaque. He opened the door. Elijah built the world. Elijah sat on the bench beneath it and said nothing for a long time. He didn't have to. This was the answer. This was the echo of a laugh no one remembered, the one they gave when a dying CEO said he was giving everything to a boy with nothing. They laughed, until they saw what he did next. And by then it was too late to stop him. He had already changed the world. Years later, a new child stood at the gates of a city that once never saw him. His name was Imani, 12 years old, formerly unhoused. A gifted builder of things most people never noticed. Models made of scrap plastic, battery packs scavenged from broken toys, bridges made from shoelaces and belief. He arrived at the Phoenix Bridge lab with nothing but a backpack, a notebook, and a letter from his middle school math teacher who had once found him asleep under the bleachers. The staff welcomed him like family. One of them handed him a map of the facility, pointing out the robotics bay, the AI sandbox, and the wellness center. But it was the drawing room Imani was most drawn to, the one lined with floor-to-ceiling sketch pads. He walked in and found a seat beneath a framed quote on the wall. Draw it, then build it. That's how the world changes. EC. He didn't know who EC was. Not really. He'd heard the name, knew it was someone important, someone who used to be like him. But as far as Imani was concerned, it could have been anyone. And maybe that was the point. He pulled out his own notebook, flipped past pages of blue ink and pencil sketches, and began again. He drew a tower. But not the usual kind. This one had roots, like a tree, and on its branches were classrooms, homes, playgrounds, laboratories. It wasn't a skyscraper. It was a world, lifted up by everyone who lived in it. Somewhere across the globe, Elijah Crane was walking through a slum in Manila, speaking quietly with a group of barefoot children who had ideas for a flood-resistant community that could float when monsoon waters came. He didn't carry a camera crew, just his sketch pad, just his voice. He spoke less now, asked more questions, took more notes, because the blueprint was no longer his alone. And that was how he knew the work would never die. The boy they laughed at had built more than a legacy. He had built a language, one that children across the world now spoke fluently, one line at a time. He hadn't meant to become a ghost, but it happened anyway. As the years wore on and the bridges rose higher, Elijah found himself drifting more often from headlines and into shadows, not because he no longer cared, but because he finally understood the power of letting others lead. It had always been about them, the kids who stayed invisible too long, the ones who grew up skipping steps, childhood, safety, trust, going straight to survival. He moved through the world differently now, quietly, purposefully, a city at a time, a center at a time. His face still graced murals, appeared in textbooks, flashed across awards. But when children met him, they were always surprised he didn't wear a suit, that he still traveled with the same sketch pad and a worn canvas bag that had once held all he owned. In Bangladesh, a girl who had lost everything in a flood taught him how to build floating classrooms out of barrels and wood scraps. In Rio, a teenager with a stutter created a voice command prototype that allowed paralyzed students to control learning environments with their breath. They didn't ask him for inspiration, they gave it to him. Back in the States, the Bridge Archive was preparing to open in Washington, D.C., a permanent museum chronicling the rise of youth-built infrastructure. Its entry wall featured a digital tree, every branch a name, every name a life changed. At the very center where the roots met were two names in silver, Vincent Harrow, Elijah Crane. The plaque beneath read, "He gave everything to a child with nothing. The child gave it back to the world." Elijah declined to speak at the opening. Instead, he sent a recording. "I don't want to be remembered for what I received. I want to be remembered for what we all created together. A world where genius is not determined by zip code, where resilience is not punished with neglect, and where the next Vincent Harrow doesn't have to die for the world to open its eyes." No one spoke after the video ended. They didn't need to. Elijah was already on a plane to New Delhi, sitting beside a girl who dreamed of designing smart sewer systems for flood zones. She didn't know who he was, just that he asked good questions, and that he seemed to care. He offered her a piece of gum and a pencil. "Show me," he said. So she did. And somewhere, perhaps in a future city not yet drawn, a new line formed, the start of something extraordinary again. He rarely returned to the penthouse anymore. It had long been donated, converted into a rotating residency for bridge scholars from around the world. But once in early spring, Elijah visited unannounced. The door code had never changed. The floors still shone with marble, and the glass still drank in the San Francisco skyline as if nothing had ever changed. But everything had. He walked through the halls slowly, each room echoing with ghosts that had long since become companions. Vincent's chair had been reupholstered, but the indent remained. A child's crayon drawing still hung on the kitchen refrigerator, Emma's from so long ago. He touched it lightly. There was a note on the desk in Janet's handwriting. "She graduates college next week, full ride, architecture. I think you'd be proud." He smiled. That night he slept in his old room, smaller than the others, the same bed, the same desk. He didn't need luxury. He needed only silence and the feeling of full circle. In the morning he left behind his sketch pad. Blank, a message in itself. Let them write the next chapter. Let them imagine, as he once had, what a different world might look like. Let them dare to draw skyward. In the heart of Nairobi, a new bridge lab broke ground, this one nestled between crowded train lines and a street market that never slept. It wasn't the largest or most advanced center, but it was the first to be entirely designed by local teens without adult interference. They called it MTA, Swahili for the neighborhood. Elijah arrived at dusk, unannounced, as always. He walked through the gates in a faded hoodie and cargo pants, his name stitched nowhere. The director, a boy of 19 named Chalo, greeted him with quiet recognition and a bowed head of respect. "We made it ours," Chalo said. "I see that," Elijah replied, his voice soft with pride. They toured the facility together. The workshops pulsed with ideas. A group of girls were retrofitting motorbikes with solar engines. A blind coder narrated a new auditory interface for learning software. The cafeteria doubled as a radio station. "What's next?" Elijah asked. Chalo didn't hesitate. "Autonomy. We want this to run without outside money by next year. Microgrids, market revenue, our people, building our future." Elijah grinned. "That's the dream." "No," Chalo corrected gently. "That's the plan." They stood together at the edge of the rooftop garden as the city lights blinked below them. Elijah closed his eyes and listened, not to the noise, but to the rhythm of something larger, hope, multiplying, blueprints, spreading, and above it all a story still unfolding, one they no longer needed him to tell. In a village on the outskirts of Istanbul, Elijah sat beneath an apricot tree watching a girl named Elif program irrigation sensors using parts salvaged from old television sets. She was 12, shy, brilliant. Her father had died in a textile fire 2 years earlier. Her mother worked 16-hour shifts and still brought home books she found in trash bins. Elif's invention had already doubled the crop yield in her village's garden plots. But she didn't want recognition. She wanted solar panels so her system could run through the night. Elijah listened carefully, asked questions, then pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket and began sketching with her. When they were done, she looked at him curiously. "You're not what I thought billionaires looked like." "I'm not a billionaire anymore," he said with a smile. "Why not?" "Because I gave it all away." She furrowed her brow. Why would anyone do that? He looked at her for a long moment, then handed her the sketch. "So I could end up here, drawing irrigation systems under an apricot tree with the smartest person I've met this month." Her eyes lit up, not because of praise, but because someone had finally seen her, not as a miracle, not as a tragedy, but as an equal. And somewhere inside her something changed, the way it had once changed in a boy who stood trembling in a glass tower lobby, clutching a resume that wasn't his, begging the world to pay attention. Years passed, and the name Elijah Crane became less of a person and more of an idea, etched into textbooks, referenced in parliamentary debates, invoked in youth centers from Jakarta to Johannesburg. His story was required reading in schools that used to fail kids like him. His face appeared in murals beside Nelson Mandela, Malala, and Vincent Harrow. But when people asked where he was, no one could say for sure. Some claimed they saw him boarding trains in the middle of the night with nothing but a duffel and a pencil behind his ear. Others said he lived in a cabin with no electricity, somewhere in Patagonia, writing letters to kids who mailed him blueprints. A few insisted he still visited bridge labs under a false name, sitting in the back of classrooms, listening, always listening. None of them were entirely wrong. Because Elijah had long since stopped needing to be seen. He had become the quiet answer to a loud, impossible question. Can one person change the world? Yes, but only if they remember that changing one life, just one, is how the world begins to turn. And somewhere, a child drew a tower with roots again, Somewhere else, another built one. And in the spaces between them, in the silence that follows after laughter fades, the truth stood tall. They laughed, until the world he imagined stood too real, too high, and too full of light to ignore. The morning air in Barcelona carried a salt tang from the harbor, mixing with the scent of roasting chestnuts from street vendors setting up their carts. Elijah walked along the Avenida diagonal, head low beneath the brim of a weathered cap, the canvas strap of his bag digging into his shoulder. In his right hand, he carried a thick manila folder stuffed with drafts and folded maps, a proposal for Bridge Europa, a network of satellite labs across the continent. He wasn't here to pitch. He was here to listen. At a small cafe tucked between a bike shop and an old print studio, he met Inez, a former street kid who now managed a collective of young engineers, artists, and activists. At 26, she had already designed 3 vertical gardens that fed entire neighborhoods. She greeted him with strong coffee, a tighter-than-expected hug, and a laptop already open. "We have 6 pilot sites ready," she said without preamble. "Spain, Portugal, Greece, Poland, and 2 in the UK. The British ones will be the hardest. Zoning issues, politics. But we've got the youth councils on our side." Elijah sat down, took a sip of the coffee, and smiled. "Tell me what you need." Inez paused. "We need space, not buildings. Breathing room, freedom to fail. If this becomes just another foreign-funded NGO project, they won't trust it. They won't own it." He nodded slowly. "You don't want a lab. You want a legacy." She pointed at him. "Exactly." For the next 4 hours, they filled the cafe's worn tables with diagrams, outlines, and storyboards. Elijah mostly asked questions, then wrote down everything she said. She sketched in bold lines, crossing out as fast as she drew, while he underlined phrases she didn't even realize were visionary. When they left, the waiter clapped slowly behind them, half in jest, half in awe. They'd taken up half the cafe, used every napkin, drained the coffee pot. Inez grinned. "Guess we're not subtle." Elijah smiled too. "We're not supposed to be." That night he returned to the apartment a bridge fellow had lent him. Bare walls, creaky windows, and a mattress on the floor. He preferred it to hotels, preferred the sound of city life just outside the window, the way it made him feel like part of something larger than himself. He laid the folder on the floor and added another page to the top, a drawing of a dome structure, half school, half marketplace, surrounded by transit lines, flanked by rooftop farms and solar towers. A future city, built by the kids who'd once been forgotten in the ones that already failed. And across the world, other teams were drawing too. In Morocco, a 17-year-old girl named Layla repurposed a military satellite dish into a long-range Wi-Fi transmitter for desert villages. She wore combat boots and a scarf across her face, not for fashion, but for sandstorms. She'd never been interviewed, never been published, but Elijah heard about her through a bridge advisor and traveled 2 days by bus just to watch her work. She didn't ask who he was. She simply handed him a wrench and pointed to the antenna. "If you're going to stand there, make yourself useful." He did. And when the transmitter blinked to life and the small school behind them connected to the internet for the first time, children ran out, waving to their cousins in other towns via an ancient iPad Layla had repaired with gum foil and spare copper. That night they sat on a dune beneath the stars. "Why me?" Layla asked suddenly. Elijah looked up from his sketchpad. "What do you mean?" "You travel the world," she said. "You pick places like this, like me. You're not just checking a box. Why?" He thought for a moment. Then, "Because places like this shouldn't have to wait for the world to catch up. They should be where the world starts." Layla said nothing, but in the glow of the fire, her eyes glimmered. He left her a toolkit and a card. Call if you need parts, or just someone to remind you this is possible. In every place he went, whether it was a rooftop in Seoul, A storm-battered coastline in Louisiana or a cratered mining village in Chile, Elijah found the same spark. Kids who were tired of being counted out. Kids who didn't want saving. Just a fair shot. Just someone to show up, not to lead, but to stand beside them as they rose. They were no longer waiting for permission. They were architects of tomorrow, writing blueprints in chalk and grease pencil and JavaScript. And Elijah, now older, a little slower, with streaks of gray just starting to thread his curls, knew one thing for certain: the work was only beginning. In a small house on the outskirts of Vancouver, a boy named Micah sat hunched over a 3D printer no bigger than a shoebox. The parts rattled and jammed often, the nozzle clogged, the filament snapped. But he didn't stop. For weeks, he had been designing low-cost prosthetic hands for kids like his sister, born without fingers on her left hand. He had no lab, no funding, only free design software, parts donated by a local librarian, and tutorials he downloaded during school lunch breaks. When Elijah arrived, Micah didn't look up. He was too focused on sanding down a palm joint with a file no wider than a paperclip. "You're early," Micah said. "I didn't realize I was expected." "I emailed your foundation 3 times, Micah said, shrugging. "Didn't think anyone would answer. Then they said you might stop by." "I like to travel quietly." "Good. I don't like people watching me work." Elijah smiled. "Neither did I." They didn't speak much after that, just sat together while the printer whirred. When the plastic hand was finished, Micah handed it to his sister, who put it on and flexed it gently. Her face lit up as she grasped a spoon and held it steady. Their mother cried. Elijah didn't. But something in his chest shifted. When he left, Micah gave him a small box with one of the prototype fingers inside. "You helped me buy the printer. You should have a piece of it." Elijah kept that piece in his pocket for the next 6 months. He touched it before every speech, every boardroom presentation, every quiet talk with policymakers who still thought innovation could only come from elite universities. He'd hold up the plastic finger and say, "This cost 62 cents to print. It changed a life. If your funding plan doesn't match that impact-to-cost ratio, we're not interested." And he walked out of more meetings than he stayed in. Because the world still wanted stories more than systems. But Elijah had run out of patience for stories that didn't lead to blueprints. And he had stopped asking permission a long time ago. He visited 3 countries in 9 days: Cambodia, Honduras, Slovakia. In each place, a bridge lab stood under construction. Frames still bare, insulation exposed, cables curled like vines waiting for life. Elijah toured every site with his sleeves rolled up and notebook in hand. He asked about drainage, ventilation, wheelchair access, solar performance, food supply. He asked how the kids felt about the designs. He asked if they felt like it was theirs. If they hesitated, he told them to redraw it. "This isn't charity," he said again and again. "This is inheritance." In Slovakia, a 15-year-old named Victor questioned the original plan for their multi-purpose building. "Why do adults always build flat classrooms?" he asked. "Why not levels? We think better when we move." Elijah gave him the marker. "Show me." By the next morning, Victor had redesigned the entire wing. In Cambodia, a girl named Dara had figured out how to cool the lab's generator room using nothing but recycled bottles, fans, and water vapor. She called it her breathing wall. It dropped internal temperatures by 6 degrees Celsius. In Honduras, the local bridge team wanted to merge agriculture training with basic coding classes. Elijah helped them design gardens that taught logic through planting patterns and harvested power from compost heat. He wrote nothing about these achievements on social media. He didn't film speeches, but every week his inbox filled with messages, new ideas, sketches, updates. Dozens of kids signing off their emails with Bridge Fellow Candidate even if they hadn't formally applied. They didn't wait for titles anymore. They acted like they belonged, because they did. And Elijah's role had become clearer with each passing year, not to lead, not to build, but to clear space, to make the world wide enough for these children to carve their own names into its bones. He stopped wearing anything that looked like wealth. He traveled with one bag, one pair of shoes, and a tablet loaded with every blueprint submitted by youth teams that quarter. He didn't eat in VIP lounges. He ate in the homes of the kids who were changing the world, one problem at a time. He didn't stay in hotels. He slept on floors, bunks, and once in a hammock above a livestock shed in rural Peru. And still, he rose each day and asked the same question: what are we building next?